Hello, ngHouston. So this is going to be, I think, maybe the most fun episode ever because we have a lot of snark going on tonight. We have a panel and a guest who I think are probably, hold on, I got to turn off my own voice over here. Every week, you'd think I would learn. Okay, so I was telling Mike earlier that these two have the best talent for being snarky and charming at the same time, and they're hilarious, and we have them both, and Chris and I are gonna give them a hard time. Okay, yeah, we're gonna have fun tonight. I'm gonna start from the left to the right. Just stay with us, it'll be great. Okay, Chris Griffith, you want to say hello?
Hello, and I am not Mike. So
I know, I'm not Mike either, don't worry.
Well, you do have a slightly differentiation between the other three of us. I'm not going to say what, but, you know, there is a difference. So glad to be here again.
I'm really glad you're here because, Chris, when I was first learning Ionic, I didn't know anyone in the community at all, and I reached out to you, and you didn't even know who I was, and you helped me. And I was a little starstruck because you had, like, a book, and I bought your book, and I was like, this guy wrote a book, and he helped me, and I was a noob, and it was great. So I've always considered you a friend ever since then. So thank you for coming. It's good to see you.
And likewise, great to be here.
And Mike Brocky, I'm so glad you're here because you're a lot of fun, and it's always good to see you. And will you say hello?
Hello.
See what I mean, you guys? He's so fun.
So
that was awesome, Mike.
I'm going to have an odd claim here. I may be the first guest who isn't presenting that may be claiming technical difficulties. I'm on hotel Wi-Fi and I have a cough. And not that the cough is really technical, but I don't know. It may be an issue. So if I mute myself while I'm talking, then you know why.
No excuses. No excuses, because we will heckle you mercilessly if you drop for any reason.
Okay.
And we'll blame any other technical difficulties on you. So, which we would probably do even if you were here. So it's okay. But don't drop. We'll miss you. You have to stay. It'll be fun.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Speaking of Mike, okay, you're just a troublemaker, I think, everywhere you go. And I've always seen you as a troublemaker, but a charming one. And I'm really, really glad to have you on the show. So without further ado, Mike, can you say hello? Mike Hartington, no, because Mike Brocky already said hello. We have two mics.
Hello. All right. Can you guys hear me? Cool. Hi. I like to think I have now the best beard in the Angular community now that Jeff is all Mr. Enterprise and has to keep his nice and clean. I can just let mine grow.
Yeah, but you have to be careful because Mike Ryan is like right at your tails. He have you seen? He's been growing his out.
I have not seen him since ngComp, so he could have a better beard than me now.
I mean, I saw him in Denver, and he did say that he was that he had a better beard than you did. I'm pretty sure he said that.
Those exact words? Those exact words, huh?
No, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. But you got to be careful.
I have to chime in here. I don't think it's proper to talk about the Angular community and beards without mentioning Abraham Williams. He's got a beard, and it has to be recognized and given credit.
That's a beard of knowledge accumulated from many releases and many different code bases.
Yes,
I hope to get that beard one day.
It is wizard level.
Love you, Abraham.
And Uri Goldstein has. I haven't seen him in a long time, but last time I saw him, he had a pretty good. Okay, so we have to talk about Ionic. Look, I have the shirt.
I know. You are a better DevRel for Ionic than I am because I don't even have a shirt on. I just have a regular shirt.
Yeah, but that's okay. You can get away with a lot because you have given us such great things. Chris?
I tossed it a pen.
There you go. We have swag. And I have the magnet right here on the filing cabinet that you can't see. That, like, not many people have that magnet. It's hard to get. It's a collector's item.
It's a very rare gift.
So Ionic, I remember going from Ionic 1 to Ionic 2, and it was great because Ionic 2 meshed with Angular even better, and it just seemed like everything just worked so nicely. And I haven't been keeping up with Ionic in the last couple of months, but there's Ionic 4 now.
Yes,
and you're going to tell us everything?
Yeah, so let's get underway with it, and I'll just start sharing my screen.
And
Let
while
me
you
know
do
when
that,
that
I want to
actually
remind
shows
everybody. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we could see it.
Cool.
So I'm going to present you. I just want to remind everybody real quick before you get started that we love questions and beginners. So I'm going to watch the chat, and if you guys have questions, even if they're newbie questions, that's totally fine. Just throw them in the chat, and we'll try to get to those.
Yes, please. I want to have as many. If there's any questions, or if I'm not explaining something very well, please stop and ask me. I would love to go over it in greater detail.
Can you slow down?
Chris and
Yes.
Brocky, we're counting on you guys to give Mike a hard time. And chat
right.
too.
Cool. So let me just I forgot to do something that I should be doing. Okay. So I guess we're going to get started. Yeah, we're talking about Ionic 4, quote unquote, the best Ionic yet. That is actually a direct quote from my boss, Adam. If you do have any questions at any point, maybe down the road, please tweet at me or, follow me. I totally judge my self-worth based on how many followers I have. So help me feel good about myself. So V4, it is a thing that we, the Ionic team, have been working on for roughly a year now. We took some time away from actually making things to kind of reevaluate where we were spending a lot of our time. So we had our own CLI tooling, we had our own way of handling routing, we had our own way for basically doing everything. And there was a lot of time, a lot of effort to make sure that that was high quality and that was something that everyone can depend upon and use in a reliable manner. So we took some time and we realized, let's kind of take a step back and go back to what we were good at. And that's being a UI library or a component library. So we just went through this period where we were figuring out, okay, what if we just shipped the entire framework, not as Angular components, not as any framework components, but as web components. For those who don't know, web components are essentially a standardized way to do everything that you can do in an Angular component, but without having to include a full framework. So these can run in the browser without any JavaScript framework, without any build tools, and they can just run in Chrome, Safari, Firefox nightly, and soon they will be running in Edge, but they can be polyfilled to work all the way back in IE 11. So they're pretty cross-platform, pretty cross-browser, good standard to use. So we went through like a 3 or 4 month period where we rewrote all of our components, but we wrote them as web components. And we made a couple tools, one of them called Stencil. If you've heard of it, it helps us just author web components. But we realized that not everything fit inside of a web component model. For Angular, we have dependency injection. This is something that is at the center of what makes Angular Angular. So we figured out a way to make the components themselves be framework agnostic, but then have framework-specific pieces in place when we needed it. So we have a package called Ionic Angular, which includes all those web components, but also includes all the Angular providers. So that way we can work with things like dependency injection. And then the real big goal is that we want to make sure that Ionic is framework agnostic. While we all love Angular and we love that everything it has to offer, Ionic, there is more than one good framework these days. And we're sharing them across all of the framework browsers. You okay, Chris?
Okay, you just got me there.
I know there's more than
Angular.
There's more than one framework.
Hold on, I want to take a step back because you said something controversial.
What's that?
That you need polyfills in order to run in IE 11. Is that as far back as it goes, or is it also support potentially other versions of IE? I understand that those versions may be deprecated, but IE 11 is as far back as it goes?
IE 11 is as far back as it goes due to the nature of the polyfills. So
Okay.
we could polyfill a lot of things, but then we're getting to an issue where the polyfills are very slow, very heavy, and the return of what we're return on investment isn't quite there. We're either shipping components that are very slow and not fast and just are kind of suck at that point. Where if we lock off at IE11, we can get something a little bit more acceptable.
Okay. That question's coming from curiosity. I do not condone the use of IE, period, let alone before IE11.
That's very controversial, Brocky.
Yes.
I know. There's a lot of enterprise out there that are not happy with that answer, Brocky.
I'm sorry, enterprises out there.
All right. So yeah, we'll support most of the major frameworks that are out there, but for the first and for like 4.0 final for the first round, we're going to be focusing on Angular. So this has been asked a whole bunch of times, and I feel like I have to address it. Are we abandoning Angular? Because we saw a lot of commits go in that aren't Angular. There's a different version of the framework that hasn't had new commits in a while. I saw there was a React folder inside of your main repo. What's going on? We're not abandoning Angular at all. We all really love Angular and love everything that it has to offer. I can install, download a new someone's Angular app, npm install, and I instantly know what's going on. It's one of the great things about having Angular is that there's all this material provided for you. We're just refocusing where we want to spend most of our time. Like I said, we were doing our own CLI tooling. We were doing our own routing, and to varying degrees of success. But at the same time, Angular kind of got really good with their CLI. I hear someone had something to do with that. They have a good router. They have everything basically figured out. So we can take a step back, let Angular do what it does best, and refocus what we want Ionic to be. So in this case, we're really going back to our roots of just being a UI library. If anyone would remember, way back in Ionic 1, we had a Angular.js folder, a Backbone folder, an Ember folder, and a jQuery folder. So if we wanted to use any of those frameworks, we were going to create bindings for it. Now we can kind of do this like 4 years later, just because web components actually caught up. So
web components.
Web components for the win, right?
So before you move further, so instead, you mentioned the router, and my questions around that, because I remember talking to you a few years ago about the Ionic router, that it functioned differently than the way the Angular router or most routers work. But
yes.
If it's not available anymore as part of V4, is it potentially a separate install where it would still be available, or the V3 router potentially still works, or is it deprecated?
So that is a wonderful question, and it's like I have an entire section of tonight's talk dedicated to just routing.
I'm not a very patient person, so I'm going to pretend I didn't ask that question, and then you can just replay that later on in your talk.
Cool. All right. I'm just going to
We do have another question in the chat, but I think you're going to get to that too, so I'm going to save it.
What's the question?
If someone is starting a new app now, should they start now from the beginning with version 3 or version 4? Is version 4 like ready for prime time? Is it ready for production, Mike?
That's a very good question. We will get to it later on in the talk.
I knew it. Hey, Leaf said hello.
Hi, Leaf. Cool. So we're going to spend most of this just kind of looking at some demos. I got an app that I've been building out and looking at the actual code that developers are going to be working with when we ship 4.0 final. So we'll kind of go over the first major piece, and that is CLI changes. So the CLI changes are a big batch of changes for us. So just to kind of throw it all out there before we dive into it, we are properly using the Angular CLI. So for anyone who was mad that we didn't use the Angular CLI, when we first started Ionic 2, way back like 2.5 years ago, the Angular CLI didn't exist. So we needed to build all that tooling ourselves. And while we've learned a whole lot, we learned, most importantly, that we do not want to maintain our own, any kind of tooling or build scripts. Thankfully, we have wonderful people like Hans and Philip, and I guess this guy, Mike Brocky, who worked on the CLI, made it good, have it in a great place where it can actually, build most projects these days. It includes all these great things like testing setup, schematics-driven generators, international I18N extraction. So if you wanted to do like all these localized builds for like French, Spanish, Italian, English, you could have all these builds just kind of all these separate versions of your app done beforehand without having to rely on any additional libraries. And the overarching goal is to just feel more in line with what the Angular community is doing these days. We don't want to have our own way of doing everything. I think one of the most disappointing things I ever saw was looking at NGX Translate and noticing that they had a special Ionic section just for us, even though we were still just using Angular under the hood. Same thing with Firebase. It just feels like we probably shouldn't have that. So we're going to go to my terminal. And I'm just going to come down here and run Ionic Serve. And what you're actually running run app serve. So this is using the Angular CLI under the hood. All of our commands for this project type end up just getting proxied out to the Angular CLI. So any of your project configurations, if you have any different packages or any different setups that you want to bring over, it can all be supported just by using the Angular tooling. We're going to open up our project. And the first thing you might notice is that we have an angular.json file. So none of this should be overly, should be brand new to some people. But we have all the configuration for a typical Angular project, all the architect stuff, serve, extract, test, lint. And then we have a couple of our own custom build stuff down here. So, yeah.
Real quick, can you take a step back and explain how you got to this point? Was there a special command that you ran in order to generate this project, or what did you do to get to this point before you continue going through what you have there?
Sure. So to actually get to that point where I have the entire project all scaffolded out, I can Ionic start. I could give it a template that we have. Different templates, whether it's a blank single view or single route, side menu base or tabs layout. We have these all built up and maintained. And then if you've used Ionic before, this isn't anything new. But what we have added is this -- type flag, where we can say, I want an Angular project. So this will go through, download all of the starter projects, include the angular.json file, include all the starter code that you are going to need, and have that all available to you without having to manually include everything. So this will already include Ionic Angular. It'll already include the Angular configuration. You just don't have to do anything, and you get to win.
Okay, so basically you ran that command, and now you're just browsing through that generated code.
All of this is just a generated code from the project. I have, generated.
But you didn't just watch installing node dependencies, so
what's that?
You skipped installing dependencies and what have you, so thank you.
Yes, I did. It's like I've done this before. So this is all the Angular JSON stuff. So pretty self-explanatory. We have these custom build stuff over here. For those who have been with us for a long time, we are huge fans of the Cordova project, but we needed some custom tricks to work with Angular and Cordova projects. So thankfully, the Angular CLI has this pretty nice build system where we can extend certain build tasks. So in this case, we just want to extend the app build task with some custom options and includes without having to override all the other settings. So these are pretty easy to add. They come by default with every Ionic Angular project. And they have all these all the options kind of pre-configured for you. We have E2E tests already set up, and we have this pretty nice thing called CLI default collections. So this is all of the default schematics that we've written to help you in your Ionic Angular project. Schematic, and that is for page. Component actually just shells out to using the default Angular component schematic. But we have our special one for this concept we call page. So it's essentially its own top-level view. And if we actually wanted to run it, we could just use the Angular CLI's generate command, or we've already proxied it through the Ionic G. We're going to call it a page, and I'm just going to call this one details. Details. Let it do its. It'll create. Oh, that's not what I wanted. It'll create the all the component stuff, our module, our styles, our template, the unit test for us. So people who are super big into unit tests, specifically Mr. Leaf, you should be happy about this. We have all the component itself, and then we've also done this updating app routing module. So this will go through, and if we actually go to our routing module, it'll already append that. It'll append that newly created component and default to lazy load the page for us. So we have all these kind of CLI processes in place to make sure that you have a pretty smooth experience with the Angular CLI and also using Ionic. On top of that,
this is so great. You know what I love about this? Because I remember, like I was saying earlier, when I first learned Ionic, it just seemed so intuitive to me because it was so close to like everything that I was doing. And this was one of the things I loved in the beginning. I mean, for me, it was easy. There are some things that are hard to wrap my head around, and Ionic was not one of them.
That's always good to hear. Yeah, I mean, Angular
don't let it go to your head.
Oh, it's already there. Angular has like a lot of really good pieces in place, like all this plumbing work that most people would have to manually do. We just used all the low-level pieces that Angular has to handle it for them. So, like I said, hooking up the routing details, it's not like it's anything difficult to do. It's just time-consuming. So our generators handle all that, and thankfully, because of the Angular CLI and schematics, it just kind of works.
Yeah, there was a lot of disruption going from AngularJS to Angular, but I mean, in my opinion, it was so worth it because it's just beautiful, clean code.
Yeah.
Especially if you actually know all the things that it does out of the box and you know how to tap into those things, then you just write this elegant code.
And that kind of gets to a good point where it's like as long as you know what you're doing, you can write these really good really good apps and really clean code. I think with things like schematics, it really makes it even easier because you can now start scaffolding out whole features of your app without having to really write anything. Like right now, I'm working on schematics for creating a master detail view, like one side view on the left and the main detail view in the middle. Like all of that can just be automated.
And I think an important point to make when you're talking about, especially when you're talking about learning new things in this community, right? It took me a while to get used to this because for a very long time, back when I was doing AngularJS, I didn't know anybody. I was very introverted and I was shy and I didn't talk to anybody and I would never post online asking for help in a million years, right? But once I slowly started coming out of my shell and talking to people in the community, which, like I said, Chris Griffiths was one of the first. Like I reached out to him and I was like this little noob. I didn't know anybody. And he was so nice to me and he helped me. And it's great. And so if you're watching and you don't know other people within the community, please reach out because we're such big nerds. And if you ask for help, and especially if you're nice and you have specific questions, people will totally nerd out and talk to you about this stuff. So I encourage you guys, start with ngHouston. We're nice. Just ask us questions. It's okay. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, that's really all I was going to go over for the CLI part. CLI is pretty self-explanatory, includes all the stuff that we need. It'll do the default production builds. It'll do production builds if you need it. So there's nothing really left for us to configure here. So I'm just going to kind of go back to the slides for a little bit. Oh, and yeah, here's the app running in the browser. Pretty self-explanatory for an Ionic app. Nothing overly groundbreaking here. But yeah, so these are the main goals where properly integrating with the Angular CLI and the rest of the Angular kind of guidelines for how projects should be done, how things should be built out. So any schematics, if you want to use NGRX and just ng-add NGRX, it'll automatically do that. So all this is really great. What's the next big change? And that's the routing, which I've already been fed one good question about routing. Let's see if I can get another one from the community. Come on. So to go over the high-level changes of what we have in routing, we're kind of dropping the Ionic router for the ng router. We're doing proper support for lazy loading using the Angular router setup. And then we can handle out all the different situations where it's like, oh, do we need to group common pages together? So if you think of a user page, you're probably going to go into that user page and want to go into different fields of that user. So you can start grouping those together and have all of those chunked into one file instead of having them exist as multiple pieces. Something that wasn't possible in Ionic 3.
No, with the Ionic 3 router, wasn't it automatically integrated to animate from one route to the next, or am I delusional?
No, it was. No, you're not delusional, Mike. Actually, what I do need to do is start up that server again, because that actually gets to a really good point. When I said we're using the Angular router, I say that with a little grain of salt. So we're using the Angular router, and we've decided that we want to build on top of the Angular router instead of just using it directly, because we wanted to include all those great things like animations, being able to do things like swipe to go back, without having to have the users kind of write all that code themselves, or tie all that animation logic into a framework-specific binding. The animation and transition logic is all part of Ionic's core components, and then we just wrote a single Angular directive to be able to take advantage of that. So in this, we have a single component called Ion Router Outlet. So this behaves the same exact way as Angular's router outlet, and in fact, it is built on top of the Angular router outlet. So it handles all of the things like, it has all the events and lifecycle hooks that people are used to experiencing with the Angular router. It just automatically includes transitions and the ability to have what's called a stacked navigation layout. So what do I mean by that? So let's go to our homepage.html, and we're going to create a button. And this button's going to have an href where we're just going to go to details.
Hey, Mike, that happened really fast. What did you just put in the command line?
So this is just my file search. It's just going through and bringing up the home page.
You just typed in the...
We're not getting into Vim. He just opened an HTML file. We're good with that.
No, he's got to teach us Vim from the beginning.
Oh.
I have a course on that.
You do? Where? Where can we go to learn Vim?
Egghead.io.
All right, get back on topic now.
Okay, so we have a button in here. We're just going to say go to details. We have an href. What's pretty nice, this isn't about routing or anything. This is just a pretty fun thing. This Ion button, because it has an href attribute applied to it, it'll automatically render out an A tag versus an actual button tag. So if you're using a screen reader, this will be totally accessible, and you can actually go through and double tap this to actually trigger the link. And screen reader will know that that is an anchor tag, not just a button. So little accessibility tidbit for you. So we added our button. It's got an href. We're going to say go to details. We're going to go to our slides. Not our slides. We're going to go to the example app. And here we go. We have it all working. That might have been pretty fast, and you might have not seen it with the delay. So we're going to do that again. We'll hit the back button. We'll reload just because. And boom. We have all the animations kind of done. Maybe not coming through in the actual screen share, but I promise you they're there. And what's nice is that these actually integrate with the browser's own hardware back buttons and your phone's buttons. So if you're on Android, you'll have your animations even if you hit that back button for us. So that's pretty nice. It animates, it does all that. We don't have to worry about it too much. But it handles everything without us having to go through and maintain our own router. So that's really the goal this year, is we want it to be as lazy as possible. Obviously, this is sarcasm. We are not lazy developers. We are very efficient developers. And the English router actually handled this.
I take back everything I said about you, Mike. That's beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. So yeah, all this just kind of works. We don't have to go through the router in detail, but all that you need to know is that we use the Ion router outlet. When we want to navigate around, we can just pass it an href, and it will automatically navigate to that correct route. If we want to go and say use something like the router API itself, we could still do that. So we can say import from Angular, we're going to go to router, and we're just going to say import the router itself, and we'll just do a little bit of dependency injection, get rid of that, go to detail, and we'll just say navigate. So we could either do navigate by URL. I'm just going to do navigate by URL because I'm lazy. All right, because I'm
efficient.
Efficient.
You guys
so
are
we
awesome.
just have the router doing its thing. Just navigate by URL. We'll go back. We'll duplicate this, and instead of using an href, we'll just say and save that. Now, the only thing to note, going back on an accessibility tidbit, is by using a click handler here, we are no longer screen reader accessible. So we are doing our users a disservice. Only use click handlers when they are not supposed to be, when they are not handled by, or when they are not related to routing. Always use hrefs. Click handlers, yeah. So we have this. We can go to details to the href, and we can go to the details by calling the router itself. And we can, yeah, right. And we can take it one step further by saying, oh, doesn't Angular have its own directive for this? It's like, well, yes, it does. It's router link. And we can say, go to details. I think that's, I can just type, right?
It's going to work?
Yeah, it'll work without any issues.
Are you sure?
Fairly certain, unless I spelt unless I spelt the directive wrong, which could always happen. Yep. That's why.
Yay!
So what happened there is that I was expecting the URL to be a child route of home, which it's not. So we just have to append a little /, and that should be good. Boom, and it works without any issues. Back onto the accessibility tidbit, because I'm on a kick with this. Router link itself, if it is not attached to an anchor tag, it will only listen for on clicks. If it's attached to an anchor tag, it'll actually use a valid href. So these two methods, while they do work, I would suggest using these with caution because these are not accessible by screen readers. Use a href when possible. Your users will thank you. If you've ever tried to use a website with a screen reader and just notice that links don't work, it's because they're using buttons or they're using some kind of non-accessible approach to navigation. Don't be that person. So,
hey Mike.
Yeah.
you broke open this can of worms, which we'll need to recycle that can when we're done with this.
What's that?
But accessibility. Is accessibility a forward thought with the rest of the component library?
Yes. Everything is built to be accessible. So if you are using, say, any of the form controls, we'll properly set the ARIA attributes. We'll make sure that all the components have the correct tab index. So everything that is being done in the app, it'll be screen reader friendly, and it will also allow the users to interact with the app without physically touching it, but using a screen reader to activate links and everything else.
Can I tell y'all something?
What's that?
You have to promise not to tell anyone, because this is just between me and you. You guys make this stuff so damn easy that sometimes I feel bad taking money for doing this. Like, I charge people money. People pay me to do this kind of stuff. And sometimes I feel bad because it's so, I know, like, it's not easy in the beginning. You have to like learn how to do it. But like now it just, because when I first learned it, it was hard, and it just gets easier and easier. And I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm robbing people. But don't share that with my clients, please.
On behalf of Chris and I would like to say thank you, because you kind of looped us all together, and Chris and I have just sat here and asked some questions. So thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I always have a place in my heart for Chris, because he was one of the first people that helped me when I was a noob, and I was scared to approach him and ask him for help. And so he'll always be a big expert in my book.
Chris is literally the expert. He has written the book on it.
Right?
And rewriting the book.
And rewriting the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, I want to ask Mike this question, and you can kind of expand on it. So one of the neat things in Ionic 3 is we can bundle up data, sneak it across as we navigate it, and easily unpack it. So, which was great. As a prototyper, I didn't have to think about, I don't have to make a provider or service to like fetch this in and out, especially if I'm just sort of hacking something together. That we kind of lost that, didn't we, in 4? We're gonna have to be a little more grown up. Yeah,
so that's something that I think is a good trade-off, because if you consider an object that you're passing along, this object could be really huge, right? It could be a deeply nested object with, and for those who aren't sure what Chris was talking about, let's actually open up an older project of mine. Don't worry about what I'm doing right now. This is just Vim being Vim.
What is that Vim thing?
This is this Vim thing, right?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So yeah,
we need to have an episode about Vim, Mike, but not tonight.
So what Chris is talking about is this NAB Push. So in V3, our navigation, our router and navigation setup was built around this NAB controller idea, where we would push different views onto what we called our stack. And because these were not dealing with URLs necessarily, we could start to pass data back and forth to these components by using our own by using something called a NAB params class. So we would call we would push the track detail page, and then we'd also pass along this object, which would have a property of track, and then a property of ID just associated with some random string. So this was technically removed in the migration to the Angular router. But I'll tell you one thing, Chris. We actually were using a service behind the scenes. So NAB params itself existed as an Angular injectable. And really, it only had 2 methods on it. And that was get and... it was just get, and then we had a property called data. Get, set, and data, where we could set the data, we could get it, and then just read the data from the property itself. So you could, in theory, make your own version of this in V4, just using Angular's injectables and providers setup. So you kind of lost the automagicness of it, but it's still possible to use it there. And chances are you're not going to want to pass around this huge object. There's performance things to take into consideration. What happens if you reload the page on this URL and that data is not available? You're probably going to want to have pieces of the app not contain all the data, but just that breadcrumb that they need to actually render.
And that's what I've been seeing as people have been migrating, is the fact that you're aligning yourself with the true Angular routers. Like, oh my gosh, I actually have to go learn this thing that I've had to avoid learning. That one section on the Angular website, like, oh, I don't need to learn that. I'm learning Ionic. Now you're having to learn that, and you lost this one cool thing. So it's like, oh, what do I do now? Well, this is just what you got to do now. You just got to sort of pay the piper and get all the other warm fuzziness.
I feel like you've been spying on me, because that's exactly what I went through. Because I learned NAB Push, and I was so excited because it was so easy, and I hadn't really wrapped my head completely around the Angular router at that time. So it was so easy. So easy.
I mean, it's still rather easy. In this case, we're just passing. This is that same project that has been migrated to V4. Oh, Mike, you can raise your hand. What's up?
You can finish out what you're saying, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. In that case where we were saying, hey, here is a param, we're just going to pass it along on the push, and then it's going to be available to us on that new component that we've just navigated to. In this, we just call the router or get the activated route, gets a snapshot of it, get the current params, and we could create some kind of observable, or we could just get the snapshot and call the params and bind directly to it. So we have the different ways. If you close your eyes and kind of just kind of squint at it a little bit, it's similar enough to where you shouldn't be able to have any issues. Plus, now we get to be fancy, and we get to have observables where we can say, oh, we're going to load a song. We can start to mix in some HTTP stuff.
This was the only part I did
struggle with. Was the actual migration to the observable base?
I struggled with snapshot because I learned, because I was working on an Ionic project right before I learned RxJS, and I had snapshot, and I was like, what's going on with the snapshot thing? Because I hadn't learned RxJS yet back then. This was a while back. Now it's easy, but back then, that snapshot was one of the ones that gave me a little pause, but not much pause. It was good.
Yeah, I don't like that code, but that's okay. That's not it. I won't say that.
It doesn't like you either, Brian.
I know that there are different ways to do that, but this does bring up a really good point. We're actually not using the Angular router as is the prescribed. So the reason why I'm using snapshot is, I know, right? Such a rebel. The reason why we're using snapshot is because we have this, go back to my editor, we have this route reuse strategy, which is a tongue twister, which basically says in default Angular apps, it'll, instead of destroying a component or creating a new instance, it would expect you to subscribe to the updates to the URL. This was a little bit different for our users. So what we did instead was create our own strategy where it says, all right, instead of just reusing a component, constantly just bring in a new instance of it. So if we go back to the browser, hopefully everything is loaded. Come on, Webpack, do your thing. This is where we just sit around. Yeah, hey, it worked.
Woohoo!
Cool. So have my app. It's loading. Let's see, look up some Jimmy Eat World if that actually works. Yeah. So if we were to say, okay, go to Jimmy Eat World, this component right here is going to actually, instead of updating the parameters of the URL, which is song ID, when we post to this new song, it'll just update the URL and create a new instance. So we have some kind of different ways of doing it. It's totally optional. You can back out of it if you do not want to, and you still want to use like the URL, the observable base URL parameters. We think this is just an approach that works better for people who are coming from V3. Makes sense?
Hey, Mike, Erland wants to know if version 4 will still allow event-driven subscribe push data flows.
Event-driven push subscribe. So if he's talking about what I think it is, yes. So I think what he's talking about is this event system that we had in V3, where you could push and where you could publish and subscribe to just events. Kind of a lazy person's way of having some kind of pub subsystem.
Efficient, Mike. Efficient
way of doing publishing events and subscribing to those changes. So in this one, we're just publishing a song added event, and then we're just passing the data that we want to use. So if we go back to the actual app just to demo it, whenever I click this button up here, we have just published an event. And you notice that this was automatically added to this section of the app. And that's because we have the component itself. Pay no attention to the comment out code. We have the actual app itself is listening for that event, and it's just adding that new data that we're passing along to some kind of property. So yeah, that's still possible, still something you can do, and it works really well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. So,
yes, he said it did answer his question.
Good.
I still have my question.
What's that?
We've talked a lot about migrating from 3 to 4 and the changes with the router in there. Is there any in your documentation, which I have to remark is actually quite good, is there anything about migrating from version 3 to 4 within your documentation, or is there some sort of migration guide?
Oh, it's like you know exactly what I had spent hours working on. Yes. So if you go to...
I thought you spent hours working on your beard.
That just happens naturally. If you
I woke up like this.
Yeah. If you go to beta.ionicframework.com, you'll get brought to our V4 beta docs. And there's this fancy little button right here called Migration Guide, where
is that a button or is that an href for accessibility?
That's an href. That's a good question. So yeah, we have all the changes.
Feeding his ego.
Hey, I'm not going to be able to leave this room. My head's going to be too big to fit through the door. But we have all of these changes that you're going to want to take into consideration. Some of the ways that we're suggesting people migrate is to just generate a new app and start migrating all the pieces over part by part. But we do go over things like the project structure, all the different changes to the package name. So we went from being Ionic Angular kind of kebab case to using @Ionic/Angular, because apparently scope packages are the cool thing to do these days. We mentioned changes to RxJS, so it's using RX6 instead of RX5. Changes to some of the other components, and then we have our own dedicated section to navigation, which goes over the different changes for like using the router, how to handle lazy loading, and whatnot. So all that is documented. And if it's not documented well, please let me know so that way I can actually upgrade it and make sure it's accurate.
Hey,
there's those of us in the community. There's a new community page who've also sort of denoted our migration strategies. So depending on what works. So mine's going to be in the book. Jesse, I assume Josh Maroney's written some migration stuff. Usually us crazy authors are out in the bleeding edge, figuring out, what's not working and then trying to go forward. So there's actually quite a few guides out there for those who are going from 3 to 4.
Yeah, this is just one of them. This is what we've done and it's worked, but there are other people who have their own migration process that that works for them, and maybe it's good to know and to see both worlds.
I have to ask you a question about the docs.
Sure.
Because there is a beautiful, and maybe the old version is still the same, because there's an ionic.io, but ionicframework.com is the actual website, right, for all the versions. So if you go to the docs /components, and I just have to tell you, because this page has a special place in my heart, because I was I spent a lot of time on this page.
Or the actual like current docs.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you if there was a newer version of this page, but the page that you just flashed up for a second has a special place in my heart because
this is the current example. Pay no attention to this current layout. Like I said, we are in beta, so there are some things to actually work out, but we have all the different sections where like it'll show you all the components in like a little preview. You'll have all the, some of the components for the markup. They'll have some like sample code, but so there's always direct you to the API changes.
Because on this page, and it took me just a minute to figure it out back in the beginning when I was a noob. As you scroll, it updates this phone on the right, and it just keeps up with you. And so as you're scrolling, it's just like, Mike, who came up with that? Like someone on your team. Do you know which one it was who like decided this is how this is going to work? I want you to go and give that person a big hug for me. And for all of us.
I will give the founder of the company a very big hug to let him know that he likes this idea, that you like this idea, and that it's actually very helpful.
Yeah, see, I was going to guess Randy.
No, this is actually Ben, because this was back in the V1 docs.
Okay.
Well, you tell Ben that we said he's cool people, because that feature is like, I mean, there's a lot of Ionic coolness, but that is, I mean, it's just simple and it's beautiful, but it's, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, we have, they really are. And we have a button on the current version at the top right above that phone that will let you switch from iOS to Android and see what it's going to look like. Because I just love this because I can see what it's going to look like on my actual app before it's just beautiful. So you have that here too. You just had to scroll back up a tiny bit.
Yeah, again, beta. We still have some bugs to work out. So
job security.
Yeah, right.
So, cool. Okay, so did you cover the question that Erland had at the beginning about version 4? Is it ready for prime time?
So currently, if we were to actually look at the package JSON, we are at beta 5 or beta 6, soon to be beta 7. So we're in a beta phase right now.
How many betas are you going to have before you're done, Mike? We have to know what beta.
That's a very good question. I was hoping you guys would know what question, how many betas we should have.
It's like before I started with GitHub. Before there was a GitHub, I had like version my like JS final.2.
It was the same thing with me in school with Photoshop files. It was like final.2, final.3, final.really. So yeah, we're at beta right now. We have some ways to go till I think we're fully usable. I have a couple apps that are out there right now that you can use, and they use beta 5 at the moment. There are some quirks currently, some things to do with theming that we're working on, and just documenting all the upgrades and all the changes. So I would say if you have a current app, make a new Git branch and try it out and see what the changes are like and how you feel about things first. But I would say hold off on trying to ship things that are, part of your day job that could get you fired.
And I want to jump in here and say, when you're talking about bleeding edge, because like I said, there was a while in my previous life as a developer, I didn't know anybody and I didn't talk to anybody in the community. But the thing is, I mean, if you're working with this new stuff, if you're watching this, right, and you're keeping up with the latest changes for Ionic or anything else in open source, you're officially on the bleeding edge. And so if you're not quite sure if it's ready and you don't really want to take that plunge yet, like jump in and help us beta test it. Because the thing is, I mean, Ionic specifically, Ionic is not the only one, but I would say that Ionic is, at this point, pretty well established. Like Ionic's not going anywhere, and it's really, really professional. So if there is a bug, and of course there's going to be bugs, then they're gonna be addressed, obviously. So do it. Even if you don't throw it into production yet, just jump in and beta test it and start. And if you find something, like the problem with me was, especially when I was a noob, I didn't know if it was because I was doing it wrong because I was an idiot and I didn't know what I was doing, or if it was actually a bug, right? So if you're not really ready to go on GitHub and open an issue, then start with us, start on ngHouston, and just come and ask us, like, hey, can you guys get this working? Are you having this problem? Are you seeing this too? And then, you know, then as a consensus, we'll go, hey, Mike, this is broken. Power in numbers.
I will also add that we have a pretty awesome forum that's dedicated to just Ionic stuff, and a Slack group that's recently crossed 20,000 members. So if you want to, like, you know, try things out and you're running into some hiccups or issues, chances are there's a, not just, you know, myself or any of the other Ionic team members, there's like thousands of community members who are, you know, who will help you out. And, you know, if you give them enough information and have, you know, are a little bit patient, they'll help you out as much as they can.
What if you're not patient? What if we just like hound you and say, when's this going to be done? What's this issue? What's this issue?
I will.
That's what I recommend.
I will
because they respond quicker if you do.
I will kindly yet firmly ask you to let me wake up first.
Back off, people. Okay, and so if they want to find the Ionic Slack, I mean, I guess you could just Google Ionic Slack channel, right? Do you know off the top of your head?
IonicFramework.com. Yeah, there's a wide .Heroku app. It'll actually invite you. But if you go to IonicFramework.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, there is this little Slack button, which will bring you to the Slack sign up page.
Look at that. That's beautiful.
Right.
And the YouTube
Cool.
and the GitHub, and that's great.
Yeah. We got a whole bunch of ways that you can get in touch with us.
Yeah.
Oh,
let me answer to that question on the chat earlier. Is it ready to start moving forward in production? I can say from my end, from playing what I've been doing and migrating the apps and working on the book, theming has been, and like Mike said, the team's working on it and sort of documenting all the ins and outs, because under the hood, you guys did some rather radical things. You went to CSS variables.
yeah.
So depending on your time frame, it all depends. If you want to migrate the core of your app, work out the routing and all of those things, and then kind of leave the cosmetics to later, yeah, you might want to consider, picking up the ball and start moving forward. But if you need to have something looking, spot on, very custom for your company right out of the gate, you might have some more angst.
Yeah, there's some parts that are really well done. Like we have an entire theme generator already built out for most people, but there are the parts like how do you customize like the height of the tab bar or certain things here and there that aren't fully done yet. But it's just a matter of we need to document it and make it accessible for everyone to look at. So those things will happen, will eventually get taken care of. So it's just a matter of time at this point.
Yeah.
How much time, Mike?
I don't know.
He's gonna kill me, you guys. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. He's never gonna come on my show again. He's like, Bonnie, you're so mean.
I love you.
I'm only mean to you because I like you.
So I do have one last trick that I have been working on for the past couple weeks. And actually, we can thank Brocky for this.
Thank you, Brocky.
So we do
Don't
realize
thank me yet.
Not everyone is going to be coming from a fresh Ionic project. Some people are going to want to add Ionic to a currently existing Angular project. And this has been kind of difficult to do in past. So I've been working on an ng add schematic for Ionic. So if you have an already existing Angular project, which this is just a vanilla Angular project, nothing too much in here, but we're just going to run schematics, and I have this little command because it's local stuff, so don't worry about it too much. But run the schematics, and then I can also squirm a little bit because it didn't work. And what I'm going to do is just pay no attention to what you are seeing.
Well, Mike, I saw this tweet that you were hinting about this, and I got this question all the time from existing Angular developers. So like, I already have a project. My boss wants me to, figure out how to go mobile. How do I bring the two worlds together? And I was like, well, let me put on my tap dancing shoes.
So this makes it so much easier. We can see that we've created some variables. We've updated your package JSON. We've updated the app module to include the Ionic module. And we've updated the Angular JSON file to include new changes. So if we actually look at what this project did, Angular JSON, we added, still try to figure out if this is the right way to handle things, but we added a whole bunch of different files, include the correct styles for Ionic. If we look at the source of the app itself, we have our app.module. If it actually opens, there we go. We have the import for Ionic module, and it's already included in our root modules imports. So from here on out, you can just use anything in Ionic, like the buttons, the cards, any of the list items, and migrate over to using all of Ionic or just bits and pieces of it. So this is definitely a nice feature, and I really want to know if this is something that the community wants, so that way I can actually get this all taken care of.
Yes.
So that's my last big. That's my last big like one more thing.
I just verbally plus one it.
You just
plus
verbally
two.
Plus two. Cool.
Yeah,
so
plus two.
This is
and you're not
you.
You can't go yet because we have a couple more things.
Sure. This is actually a PR right now. So if you want to make me feel really good about myself, go to our GitHub, go to issue 15323, and just hit that little +1 button down at the bottom. Already a few people have. I'm pretty excited about this. So I hope this will get added. And
what issue is that? 1523?
15323.
Alexa, update issue 15323 with +1.
If that worked, that'd be cool. There we go. I'll +1 my own issue.
I'm trying to get a link to it so that we can put it in. Let's see, 1532. I don't remember how to search for an issue in GitHub. Don't worry, I'll figure it out.
Chat.
There we go. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, this is our last big to do. Well, our last big new feature, at least on my end, and then we have documentation, and then we should be pretty much done at that point. So very exciting times.
That is very great.
You mentioned you had some questions, right?
Yes. First question, where'd it go? Have to scroll up. Okay, Gabriel wants to know if it will have any performance gain when using capacitor instead of Cordova.
So that is a very good question. So performance gains will definitely be there. They're probably going to be capacitor's goal eventually will just be to be modern tooling instead of focusing on performance. It is something that we want to make sure that we're not worse, but we're not focused on that solely. So maybe there will be performance gains. I don't have a good answer. We haven't tested things thoroughly yet, but we're focusing more on just making the whole process of working with this native layer much smoother than it has been in the past.
Mike, what's capacitor?
So, good question.
I know what it is, but you missed that point.
So, capacitor is essentially a new take on Cordova. It loads the app in a web view. It has access to the file system and native APIs through a plugin setup. But what we have decided to do is change some of the ideas that happen with that native project. So we're testing out different build processes, different ways of managing native dependencies that are less error prone, and follow modern native tooling. And eventually hopefully some of the ideas is that we'll contribute that back to Cordova or just keep that in our own project to experiment with.
Who owns Capacitor? Like, who's managing and running and in control of that?
We are.
We, like the four of us, or we like Ionic?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We
Surprise,
like
Rocky!
Ionic. So it's actually a project maintained by the Ionic team. There is a dedicated group of people within Ionic who are working on it and maintaining all the code, making commits and changes. But it is something that is an Ionic project itself.
Okay, you ready for another question?
Yeah.
Another question from Erland, who said he asked too many questions, but he did not ask too many questions because they're all very good questions.
There's no such thing as too many questions.
Right? Even if they're not good, well, yeah, you come here to ask questions. We love it. Okay, so he wants to know how long version 3 will have support. And I did you already talk about breaking changes between version 3 and version 4?
Not yet, actually. It's a very good topic to
Migration guide.
Migration guide. But we do realize that there are going to be places where we need to make some breaking changes. So actually, Brandy, one of the leads on the team, has made this crazy long breaking changes guide, and I'm scrolling through this just to show how detailed it actually is. Where every single breaking change that we've ever made in the migration to V4 has been documented. And if we go to Ionic V4 migration TS-lint, we have this project that we're currently working on that uses Codalizer under the hood to automate some of this and actually show new features, give you warnings in your project where they're like, oh, hey, this has no longer been, this is no longer acceptable. Here are the new changes. So we link to the different sections in the breaking changes document, and we have all these different rules to automate some of it and lint your project for you. So there are some ways that you can work around it, work around these breaking changes. But if there's parts that aren't covered, they are covered in this massive breaking.md file.
Okay, but I usurped Erland's question because I asked his question immediately followed by my own question. So I'm sorry, Erland. What about adoption support for version 3? How long will that be available?
So version 3, as far as we consider, is done. We will not offer any kind of support. So we encourage most people to migrate to 4.0. But we will. What I will say is that with 4.0, we've officially moved to like a long-term support option. So LTS will be 4.0 will be LTS. We'll provide bug fixes for up to 2 years. And if there's anything major that pops up, we'll fix it as well. But we'll make sure that 4.0 is very well supported, include all the changes for the foreseeable future. And it's something heavily inspired by how the Angular team does their support features as well. So yeah.
They are kind of great, aren't they?
It is pretty nice to know that 4.0 for Angular is still under LTS. So we figured with our 4.0, we'll move to an LTS pattern for everyone.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in terms of LTS and corresponding with Angular, is there a minimum version of Angular to use with Ionic 4?
So right now we are using 6 for the default projects. So whenever you create a new Ionic Angular project, you're going to get Angular 6, RxJS 6, and all the tooling that focuses around there. As new changes come to Angular, probably in their 7.0, we will address any any changes that are required at that point. And if that requires us to make a breaking change or a new major release, we will consider that. But we're trying to we are in a pattern of making sure that any major changes happen on a predictable release cycle. Again, heavily inspired how Angular does their releases and how they do their versioning. So we're not going to just willy-nilly cut a new major release, but we're going to actually follow through on some kind of release cycle. But
is there anything you are going to do willy-nilly?
Make funny commits.
Do you really? I haven't looked at your commit messages.
Not directly, but I do have some funny ones on my own personal projects.
Are you allowed to? Like, if you're a Willy Ionic team, like, do they try to like quench? Do they try to squash the silly, or do they embrace that?
We have a specific commit process similar to Angular, where all of our commits are either well, not just professional. If we have a fix or a feature or some kind of change, we have an automated changelog process that will go through and generate based on any of those changes that we've actually shipped. So, for instance, here we have a bunch of bug fixes. This is because all these commits have been tagged as fix, and we can just do just pass options along like that. So this will read what we fixed and what was the actual commit message. So it's pretty nice to have. So I'm okay giving up the silly commits just to be able to do this.
Yeah, you're right. That is pretty slick. I can't argue with that. That's pretty cool.
Again, we followed what the Angular team did, and they had a good idea.
They did. We'll save silly for the happy hour. Fine. Be professional. It's fine. Just this once. All right. Well, I think that's. I think that we have answered all the questions. Panelists, do you have any more questions?
Nothing that is appropriate for here.
I have a question for you, for all of you. Then
turn off your screen share so we can see you.
Oh boy, you want to see my face?
That's Bonnie's request, not mine.
Yeah, but it's my show, so I can request that. It's okay.
How do I? Okay,
there you are.
Hey,
there
I am.
There you are.
Cool. I did a thing. Are you guys gonna try V4? Okay, that's my only question, really.
Yes,
Chris, I know you're using V4 already.
Well, I'm actually using it in a very bizarre way. So I'm actually a UX designer, and I'm actually using Ionic as my sort of Lego bricks as I'm designing my apps and sort of screenshotting them and putting them into my documentation for my developers who are using some other framework. I didn't have an influence of that, but it's so fast for me to actually lay out my UI, especially now with 4. Boom, I have a version in iOS and Android that I can give to this team and know they're going to build what I want. So, yeah, I'm using 4. Yay.
Yay.
And you have multiple, Gabriel, Erland, Chris Ross, Michael Moreland, all said in the chat, yes, they will all use. So we're just rolling in the numbers here.
I won't avoid your question. I will answer your question. If I find a project that has a mobile need, yes, I will definitely be considering and playing with 4.
And if you're a little bit worried.
It's not just mobile now.
It's not just mobile?
It's not just mobile now. So if you want to use something for, like, say, Electron, or even this cool new idea called progressive web apps, you can use Ionic there too. If you have, I recently have done some work with progressive web apps, and I have an A+ on my Lighthouse score. So it's fast.
That's so awesome. Okay, so and if you want to use version 4 and you're a little bit worried about using version 4 because you're like doing this for work, like for a professional environment, then I want you to jump into the community and start participating, and go ahead and do it, and then kind of join forces with us and start participating and asking us questions and telling us if you get stuck on anything so we can get Mike to come back and help.
Definitely.
Okay, I have to say one more thing, and I think that's it for tonight, because we went through this traumatic experience with Jeff Cross's beard a couple years ago. So just checking in from the community, you're not cutting your beard anytime soon? Because Jeff just abruptly cut his beard, and there was like no.
Approval.
Yeah. Okay. So we get like a poll, or we get some warning. We get a notice.
There will be a community poll where I will ask everyone if I need to cut my beard, how should I cut it, and in what style should I go with. I will never go clean shaven.
Okay. I think you should
have a
just
baby face.
Don't shave it. I mean, you can trim it, right? But now, I mean, it's at the point now. It's like the whole community. It's a community asset. So.
Take that, Jeff Cross.
Is your beard open source then?
Kind of, yeah.
Yes.
I like it.
Yes.
Yes. Well, Jeff Cross started it, and then he traumatized us because he just cut it one day, and it was like, wait, what? I wasn't ready. So, okay, well, I think that's about it for tonight. Thank you so much. If you guys have any more questions for Mike, you can come on our Slack channel, but even better, go on the Ionic Slack channel because there's so many. It's a much bigger channel. So go join both Slacks.
Yeah, join both Slacks, and if you do have any other questions and I'm not online, just tweet at me. I'm pretty accessible, and I love helping people. So,
but don't add them on Slack.
Please don't.
You need more Slack channels. All right, well, that's our show.
That's all I need.
Thank you again, Mike, for coming. Thank you, Chris Griffith and Mike Rocky. Thank you all for coming. This was a super fun show.
As always,
we'll see everybody. Thank you. We'll see y'all next week.